You're live.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the 57th week of the Free Assange Online Vigil. My name is Andrew Smith. I'm joined today with my co-hosts Steve Poikinen and the always wonderful Sarcasm Stardust Misty. Today is day 3,528 of the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange. It is day 481 since the WikiLeaks publisher was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison following a $4.2 billion IMF loan to the nation of Ecuador. It is 34 days until the second phase of Julian's show trial and extraordinary rendition hearings begin. It is 1,159 days since Reality Winner has been in federal custody. But in some good news, it is 144 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning. And she is streaming regularly on Twitch. I believe it's Thursday through Sunday. So in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and put that link in there for everyone if you want to go ahead and get signed up for her Twitch stream. But also, we are about 31 days away from when we will all be arriving in Washington, D.C. And so if you have not already, please help us circulate the GoFundMe link that we have. We're well over halfway there, but we are still in need of some, essentially just materials for the protests themselves, but we have been able to secure housing at this point. So I just really want to say thank you and that I appreciate everyone that's helped out so far, especially considering the world's gone fucking insane in the last, I don't know, 8 months. Sorry about that.
What have I told you about the phone, Andrew?
I know.
What have I told you? Tell the people what I've told you.
But without any further ado, we are joined today by a very special guest, Danny. How are you today, Dan?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us. So if you could, let everybody know a little bit about you as a returning guest in case there's anyone out there that doesn't recognize you.
Right. So I'm a penitent Irish Guild Catholic former imperial water carrier turned writer, activist, proponent of decency. I write for a whole bunch of publications, books, spend time, in the streets when possible, and try to lend my voice all over. And definitely got interested in the Julian Assange case and in WikiLeaks in general when I was in Iraq, and the generals and the politicians were lying about the civil war, and so I saw the civil war in the form of the bodies in the street that, of course, WikiLeaks made quite clear we all knew about through the Iraq war logs, and so that was kind of my intro to the topic. So yeah, that's the basics, I think.
And we just had the 10th anniversary of the release of the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, and we're gonna dig into it here in a little bit. But before we do that, occasionally on the show, like when there's a really kickable public figure like Mike Pompeo, like we never pass up an opportunity to kick around Mike Pompeo. In this instance tonight, we just got to take a few minutes and we got to kick around Elliot Higgins and Bellingcat as both the person and the institution, because Higgins came out with a book where he had the unmitigated gall to straight up pirate the phrase from WikiLeaks, intelligence source for the people, which is something that Julian had been, basically all but trademarked a decade ago. And there was this hysterical exchange between our guest last Saturday, Stefania Maruzzi, and Elliot Higgins, where Higgins was backpedaling so fast that he actually slowed down and reversed the rotation of the Earth, regressing all the way to like a spoiled 7-year-old little child who knew some potty language. And like that's the end result of Stefania just dog walking this bastard all up and down the Twitter sphere was just freaking hysterical. I know that we have an RT article in the show doc. I'm gonna go find Stefania's post and throw it into my chat, and I'll probably throw a link into like our Riot or whatever for the A4A chat. But look, baby, it is absolutely hysterical, and it illustrates the the position that people who are in media that they know is propaganda. Like Elliot Higgins knows he's doing narrative management. He knows that he's pushing regime change. He knows that his outlet is funded in part by the NED. He knows what he is, and he knows what he does. So to watch him like try to play coy or try to be like, I'm a real journalist, you know.
Did you see that he retweeted WikiLeaks? Apparently WikiLeaks tweeted something about it and said something, and then he retweeted that and was like, see, WikiLeaks gets it. And that just pissed me off even more. Like, shut up, you douche canoe.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I assume you have some thoughts about Bellingcat, Danny. I would like to hear those.
Well,
on Sharon.
I just, you mentioned it, you know, the National Endowment for Democracy, right? Like if you look at where the money comes from, you know, it's such a cliche, but there's value in it. Like they don't even hide this stuff. These are the folks, of course, who've been behind regime change after regime change and just, you know, smearing anybody who smacks of anti-establishment or not from the establishment, marginalizing these candidates, calling for, you know, more intervention in Syria. You know, the idea that like, well, it went really well in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya, so but it's going to be fine in Syria. And so just the gall to take that line and then to throw a fit about it. You know what I think is interesting? These folks, these kinds of folks like Higgins, they're the ones who say that we're snowflakes. And I don't want to say we, but they say that like the vague left, like we're the snowflakes and we're the crybabies. But they're the biggest ones of all. I mean, they're the most PC, but it's like right-wing sort of interventionist, you know, intel world PC. They're crybabies. They're crybabies like the cops. They're crybabies like, you know, you criticized or fired a guy who knocked like an older man over, so now we're all gonna like take our balls and go home and leave public safety, you know, which is not what we're doing anyway. But this is what you see. So the hissy fit, this is the establishment snowflakeism, and it happens with like conservatives a lot too, like just the hardcore conservatives. I think that it's instructive to watch people's anxieties play out, to watch people's insecurities play out. And it plays out in all kinds of ways. And, you know, I'm tangential, but it plays out like when everybody pulls their assault rifles out because they have to wear a mask. Now, I'm not even saying anything about that in principle, but men in particular, right, will play out their insecurities for you if you give them enough time. And this Twitter meltdown, which is probably the only way to put it, is a perfect example of that. Without dealing with any of the issues, without engaging with any of the substance, we're just going to play out our insecurities, you know, live on social media.
That's so true. And I'm glad you dragged the police into this too, Danny, because them freaking out and the way that they've been like, okay, well, fuck it, we're just not going to do the whole cop thing anymore. That's because people are asking for a little bit of accountability on behalf of the police. Not okay, you all need mandatory psych evaluations, or not, okay, could you, you know, change everything about the way that the police department works, which there are some people asking for, and that's a valid thing to ask for. But just asking for a modicum of accountability sends a disproportionate number of police officers into a fucking just diaper filling rant that is it shows you that they know what they're doing is wrong. It shows you that they know that they are in a position of authority that is very, very easy to get away with abuse, and they enjoy the ease of abuse that they have.
Well, I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was to say the exact same people that will hold like the surveillance state or national security over our heads and say, if you don't have anything to hide, you don't have anything to worry about. As soon as you flip that on them and on those institutions of power, it's the exact same thing. Just massive freakouts to the point to where they've got a journalist locked away in the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom, facing potentially 175 years in prison for embarrassing them, for holding them to that. If you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't be afraid. Well, they had a lot to hide, and this is the manifestation of that fear.
Well, there's 3 crybaby communities, and I think that this Twitter thing sort of plays into it. The 3 biggest crybaby communities in American public life are the cops, the military, and the intelligence community. So these are self-styled walking sacred cows, right? You can't touch them, you can't criticize them, you can't even ask for reform. And in the police situation, but also in the intel and military ones, but the police are instructive here. There's like 2 responses. Like the main response is we'll take our ball, we'll go home, and then we'll hope that crime rises, right? What we call crime, so that we can then say, see what happens if we're not around. You did need us. And the second thing we'll do is if like someone within our own community snitches on us, then we'll go full Serpico and, try to murder them. I mean, that's the extreme example, but it's real and it's happened before. In New York, there was a guy who just like on a minor issue, like snitched on his buddies for good reason. And then like he was like attacked and like forced into like a mental hospital, because he was like asking for accountability of his buddies. So I think that you see this with the intel folks too. You see it with the establishment types. If you question their expertise, their special status, in the world of social media, it will come out on Twitter. But I think what was important about the article you're mentioning, because I had it in front of me earlier, and an analysis on this is that it shows that something like a Twitter rant or a meltdown on, a pundit spot is more than cosmetic, because there's something underlying that's driving that.
Absolutely. And it's that fear that they don't feel like a hero, I honestly think, especially with a guy in his position, because he probably fancies himself like that mercenary champion that is doing X, Y, or Z to or with or for the world. When in reality, all he is just a war pig. And he's someone that's literally willing to sell anyone and anything under the bus for a buck. And it's a mentality among the private intelligence services where you see it great in the UC Global case, where David Morales was literally bragging about going to the dark side. I hope I have that dude's name right. Yeah. And it got to the point where he was approached, if I get this story right, by employees, and literally slammed his hands down on the desk and he said, "I'm a mercenary," while referring to what they were doing in the Ecuadorian embassy. And so it's what these people hold as sacred to themselves. It's their identity that they've built around this massive structure of power, that they're willing to give up any belief system, that they're the most unprincipled people. If someone has $1 that they can slide under the doorway to get them to do some dirty trick.
I like what you said about heroes. I mean, these folks, like these paramilitary types, the mercenaries, the intelligence types, the police, the soldiers. I mean, talk about obscene, talk about obtuse even, like just this idea that I'm a hero. Like, I mean, I'm not into the whole like nostalgizing, like the quiet Gary Cooper type or nostalgizing World War II. Like, I'm not into that. But goddamn, if there wasn't something preferable about my grandfather's generation, where they were like, yeah, I captured, I landed at Normandy, but I'm not a hero. Today, they're like, no, I'm a hero. And if you don't tell me all the time on the Jumbotron in St. Louis at the Cardinals game and everything I do, if you don't constantly tell me I'm a hero, then I'm going to go into a hissy fit. I mean, that's a sick society. That's a cult.
The big difference is back then, regardless of what the U.S. empire was or was doing, it did take a stand against fascism that was on the rise, trying to become a global power. And people identified with that struggle because it fit the American propaganda of we are the free country. Regardless of sides and conflict, that was the people going into it believed they were freedom fighters.
Well, and I also think that this has kind of been intentional, like the whole idolization of service members. I think they want everybody. They don't. You're not allowed to criticize them, and they've been able to kind of create this environment where you have to look up to people who serve in the military. You can't say anything bad about them. You have to buy their lunch at Bob Evans. You have to do the whole parade and the jumbotron at the football game and all that stuff. And they've kind of like cultivated this environment where and I think that's why now it's expected that I'm a hero, because we've pounded that into their heads, and it serves two purposes, kind of.
Well, and the wars that we fight right now aren't wars against global fascism. They are fascist wars. They are wars specifically for the intent of the exploitation of the population living there and the resources under their feet. And people, to some extent in the military, recognize that, whether it's while they're serving in it or when they get out. And that's why there has to be this huge paid level of propaganda, because when that person goes to bed at night and that propaganda turns off, all he has left is his thoughts and the volume that the VA gives him. And it's terrible, because it took someone that thought, regardless of how they got in, for the most part, they were doing the right thing, turned them into a drone, sent them off to some war in some land they never heard of that they can't find in a map, to kill some kids somewhere to get some guy some money, and they can't deal with it. So,
well, you can't put that on the recruitment posters, man.
Right.
You can't. But look, man, because it's an all volunteer military, and we can debate the finer points of that, because I believe Danny's made the point a number of times that it's a poverty draft. But it is an all volunteer military. So unless we fetishize the soldiers, unless we're turning troops into objects of worship, that the recruitment stalls. And then you've got to come up with a brand new propaganda campaign, whether it's $9 million to $9 billion or whatever it was to the NFL that in 2009 that Obama put into motion, that now you can't have a football game without a fucking Memorial Day parade or a Veterans Day parade. But it's just, it goes back, to kind of put a cap on it. In my opinion, it's because the military is all volunteer that we have to go through these exercises and fetishization. Otherwise, people might take a closer look at our foreign policy. People might take a closer look at exactly how the U.S. operates on the global stage.
If I could just add one thing to that, on all three of your points, this cult of adulation is more than symbolic. I mean, it plays of soldier adulation and cop adulation and CIA adulation, because now that's the Democrats' favorite organization suddenly. Like they never heard of the Church Committee, which didn't even go far enough. Like I thought he was a Democrat or something, or maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, but this cult of adulation, it plays on the existing original sin of the soldier, which is self-righteousness, right? We always have to be aware of it. It's there. But it's more than symbolic, because it is this like mercenary Memorial Day factor where we turn us into a Praetorian Guard, and then less than 1% does the fighting. You don't have to think about it. All you got to do is thank them and buy them that Bob Evans meal. And it's like a salve to the guilt and insecurity that a lot of white males usually, but not only, feel about like this sense of like not serving, which is ridiculous, because I don't think that makes you a better person to serve. Far from it. Like it could be a problematic one, and then we fetishize the militarism as a way to recruit in the Deep South and the Mountain West, which, oh, by the way, are the militia strongholds in America. So that might come back and bite us in the ass if the Civil War does break out. But, look at a guy like Higgins, though. I mean, he falls right into this. I mean, look at who he serves. What stories has he famously chosen to focus on, right? Syrian regime change, Ukraine, poisoning of Sergei Skripal. What does he not lend his, journalist, whatever you want to call him, hand to? The Rohingya? Not them. They're irrelevant, right? The Kashmiris, no, not them, because India is an ally, quote unquote, and the largest democracy in the world that still has pogroms in the streets. Not Gaza, not Yemen, not the African Sahel. I mean, this is instructive. What you choose to study if you're an academic, what you choose to cover if you're a journalist is a decision. And it tells you something. It's illustrative of who you serve. And who he serves is the powerful establishment intel folks. And when you question him on it, even on a minor matter like obscene plagiarism, he's going to lose his shit because you are poking a very insecure bear.
It seems like a participation trophy mentality to me when somebody actually gets called on their shit, especially when the only reason you have a job is because you unquestioningly try to manage the narrative. Like, and I don't know Elliot Higgins personally, you know, I doubt I'll ever have an interaction with him, you know, one-on-one, but based solely on his behavior on Twitter, not just yesterday, but for the entire time I've had this account, you may as well have like punched his mom in the face the way that he's acting over this. And Mrs. Higgins, if you're listening, I feel like you should have maybe smacked Elliot around a little bit more when he was a kid. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm not up on the Higgins parenting style, but it really feels like because there's this outlet, Bellingcat, and because he's got a blue check next to his name, that means that A, he's above criticism, B, he's always right, and C, anyone who points out the just gaping flaws in the dude's logic is suddenly like, you know, working hand in hand with, you know, Russia or China or Venezuela or Assad or whoever it is that he's, you know, manufacturing up some consent for in any given article.
And on the cosmetic and silly side, on the petty side, I mean, he's got a punchable face as well. I mean, let's just be clear about that. And in that sense, he fits with Pompeo, who I'd be remiss, and I know you want to talk about him. He is my nemesis, as some people know. He's probably never heard of me, but I spent a whole lot of time thinking about him. And in my less admirable, mature moments, you know, I've talked about wanting to physically fight him on live television over Twitter. So, I mean, am I better than Higgins? Maybe not always, but in my defense, they both have extraordinarily punchable faces.
I would buy tickets to that fight, you know. You
know what I mean? Like two West Point grads facing off. One is, you know, one has like a modicum of morals, the other is powerful. You know, whatever. I mean, we'll have Trump be Don King. It's like a very WWF thing. It's perfect.
Well, you got to be careful because Pompeo may have been taking his dog food, so he could have stepped it up a couple notches.
Right.
Yeah, he's got the raptor on the side.
We should try and find that just to roll it by the end of the vigil, the clip of the Italian journalist giving Pompeo the bag of dog food. It was
wonderful.
Oh,
I really appreciate that. But real quick, this week's call to action is the same as last week's call to action, and it is joining with our Australian brothers and sisters that have gotten multiple city councils across Australia to come out in support of Julian. I put the link into chat for everyone. You can also find it on actionforassange.com if you're watching this later. It's week 56 still for the action, but it outlines what the Melbourne City Council passed in support of Julian, which is a great tool to provide for a city council to pass in and of themselves, because most times they just lack the creativity to put something like this together. But also it has a letter that shows a lot of the cities throughout Australia and different city council people and different communities that have come out in support of Julian from a municipal level. So there's probably only one meeting left, one city council meeting left before Julian's rendition hearing starts in September. So if you could, just while you're watching, pull up another tab, put us in the little bottom of your phone, and get the names and the email addresses of all your city council people together and send them an email. because it really could make a big impact. And at the very least, it puts the city council on blast to say, where do you stand on issues that actually support our community?
And also, while you're at it, you should probably send a letter to Julian too, because,
Absolutely.
I'm sure he could use some friendly words,
Not that he can write back because they glued the keys to his keyboard down.
Right. I don't even know if he's getting his mail, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no,
no idea for sure, but
so
I mean, we have to do something, I guess.
we do have, and it's probably way easier just to talk about it than to actually pull it up. But Stella Morris, at Stella Morris 1 on Twitter, put out an article or tweeted out an article from the lawgazette.co.uk, which essentially outlines how people are having to wait over a month to do a video conference with their lawyers or representatives, because essentially they're just telling people, well, all the time slots are full. So for you to actually meet with your lawyer, then you're going to have to file this time slot, wait a few months. Your trial will probably already have passed, but at least you won't have caught COVID. And that's the situation in the UK right now. And we knew from what we had talked about on Saturday that according to the National Health Service of London, that Belmarsh Prison has been COVID-free for a few weeks. I'm not sure if you can believe them or not, given the situation and the circumstance and everything, and considering that there was people that died inside of Belmarsh with coronavirus. So just to make mention of that, and I hope Julian, with Belmarsh being cleared, actually has the ability to meet with his lawyers and meet with his family on a more regular basis now.
Let's process that for a minute, because we're supposed to, like, it's a cornerstone of our legal system and the UK's legal system for people who are facing a court date to be able to confer with their legal team. And this is something that Julian hasn't been able to do since like March.
And this isn't just some court case. This isn't like you got caught speeding.
Right.
This is Assange versus the United States government. There is no bigger court case. There is no bigger battle. Like that's some intense shit. And he hasn't seen his lawyers in, is it 18 weeks now, I think?
And if it can happen to Julian, if it can happen to the most high-profile prisoner publicly in the world, where they can say, well, you can't meet with your lawyers. We know everything's cool, but you got to wait insert period of time until the conference room is cleared. Then it can happen to absolutely anybody.
Well, and when he was speaking to his lawyers, they were bugging it. So he didn't even have, attorney-client privilege. They were spying on him the whole time. And we're supposed to take this court case seriously. Like, it shouldn't just be thrown out on its face. It's ridiculous. It's a completely ridiculous case. And it's bizarre to me that it's even like being allowed to continue. It's such a farce.
Well, I think that you brought up something important, though. This is the U.S. versus Assange, right? So like the United States is in it. But what's funny about that is, 18 weeks without a lawyer, all these other just ridiculous farces of legal restrictions. I bet you John Wayne Gacy had less restrictions, and Ted Bundy, because the real crime of Assange, from my perspective, and I think that what this demonstrates is the thing that upsets them most is not mass murder, right? What upsets them most is if you embarrass them, if you expose them. That's when they will really come for you, more than if you could be a serial killer. You'll probably get more rights.
Oh, absolutely. And you'll have TV shows made about you. You'll be glorified on every mainstream media outlet with your name put in every bottom scroll and pasted on every CNN page talking about how you did it and where and when. And
well, I mean, you can just look at the fact that Julian had to sit behind some crazy Hannibal Lecter plexiglass cage thing when Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, there's video of him standing in court next to his lawyers describing in great detail all of the ways he murdered people. And Julian wasn't even able to sit with his lawyers. So, and he's an intellectual. He's a publisher. He's a thinker. He's not Dennis Rader, a serial killer who tortured people. You know, like just that the fact that he had to sit behind that ridiculous plexiglass, whatever the hell that was, is so obviously it's just really dumb, and it's just crazy that it's allowed to continue.
Well, when the prosecutor is the serial killer, right? When the complainant, when the U.S. government is putting you on trial, then I suppose this is the inversion, isn't it?
It's the total inversion of justice. I think that's a really good way to actually describe it, because you have the war criminals prosecuting a journalist that exposed them, while not prosecuting their journalist buddies that are in the war criminal market and war profiteer and war propaganda market with them. Because they could quite easily go after every major institution of journalism for these very same leaks. And during that first court hearing, the first week of this back in February, I believe they actually were forced to admit in court that it would allow them to go after any publishing institution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that sends absolute chills through the spines of people in establishment or legacy media. These are individuals who at this point, like regardless of why you got into journalism, if you're 20 years in, if you're 10 years in, and you're writing copy, or you're going to interview a sitting member of Congress, you know that the only reason you get to do that is because you're going to turn out the right kind of copy, and you're not going to ask any questions that give your interviewee any sort of pause, or going to paint a bad light on what it is they do, or what it is their government or their corporation does.
And like
you're there to be a fucking fluffer. That you're not a writer, you're a fluffer.
They'll work hand in hand with these media organizations to plant the questions, to be able to produce the spin that they want to produce and have things framed in the way that they want to have it framed.
You know, I used to say, I think I wrote in an article a while ago, I used to use that like old cliched quote about the Nazis. You know, first they came for the socialists, then they came for, you know, whatever, and then they came for the Jews. And when they came for me, there was no one to defend me, because no one, you know, they were all gone. And I used to say, like, oh, you know, first they came for Assange, and then maybe they kind of went for Max Blumenthal, and someday they're going to come for the New York Times and the Washington Post, and won't they be sorry? And I realize how naive that is now, because like you guys are saying, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they work for the state in large part, and they're complicit. I mean, they're mouthpieces for the State Department, which is a mouthpiece for the CIA. I mean, this is how far along we've gone. So they're not scared that first they came for the socialists, then they came for the Jews, and then they came for me, because they know full well that no one's coming for them, because they won't expose themselves, because they're not real journalists.
And that's a problem, because now we need regular people who are being misinformed by those, you know, media pundits about the situation that we find ourselves in. And this is really more about our ability to hold powerful people accountable. And I've always said this has always been about so much more than just Julian. Like, his life is worth fighting for, and, you know, all of that stuff, but it's so much bigger than that. And, you know, the implications that this is going to have, it's, we talk about it all the time on the show. And I honestly just, I get frustrated because I can't find a way to verbalize it in a way that people will be like, oh yeah, you're right. This is crazy what we're allowing to happen right now. So yeah, this is, and it's not just gonna, you know, come for, you know, the Jimmy Dores or the Kyle Kalinskis or the Tim Blacks or whatever. This is coming for anybody who dares dissent. This has been a slow roll, and it's not just this. They've, you know, attempted to make protesting illegal, and this has been a slow build attack on free speech and a free press for a while now. And it's starting to become more obvious, but this has been going on for a long time, and we need people to wake up to what's happening, because it's not going well for us.
There are people right now in 2020, there may even be people who watch this vigil who don't know who Gary Webb was or why Gary Webb was assassinated. And that was what, 95, 94, maybe. I mean, there's a book by Joel Whitney called Finks, and I've talked about it before. It's the subtitle is How the CIA Tricked the World's Best Journalists, and it goes through not just recent history of intelligence apparatus intrusion and narrative management, but it goes all the way back to the OSS days, and just kind of walks you through exactly how the United States government and the intelligence agencies that call the shots for the United States government operate through the press. And like, I have a very high amount of confidence in this audience not to fall for that. But man, you get anywhere away from, shows on, I get, digital platforms, because you're not really going to find any of them on TV, but you get just a little bit away from shows where the national security state is discussed, or intelligence agencies in general, Julian Assange, these things. And then you find that independent media is largely made up of people who want to be pundits. They want, this is a stepping stone for another job. And like, you really have to be careful, and you really have to pay attention to where you're getting your information from, because more often than not, it's somebody trying to sell you something that was baked in Langley.
Well, and it starts with the small stuff. If you want a scoop and you're at a big paper and you're always competing, right? I mean, you're constantly, fighting to start on the ball team. And if you're like at the Boston Globe, you're in AAA fighting to get to the Post, or to the New York Times. If you're in that situation, then you need the scoop. And the intelligence analysts, right, or intelligence sources say, or whatever punch is packed behind the comma and the headline, they're not going to feed you the story that you need. And so even though the story's fake, they'll just, first thing they're going to do is blackball you. And then the next thing is, if you find a way to do it independently, I mean, without, I mean, you get yourself in trouble with saying stuff like this in my position, but like, things happen to you, right? You go to jail, bad things happen in your personal life. Sometimes you're found with 2 shots in your head and it's suicide, right? So if the first thing is they just ignore you and then they blackball you, and that's enough most of the time. But if you're, other folks, and I'm thinking Gary Webb, I'm thinking Michael Hastings, I mean, there's a lot of folks and bad stuff happens. Or you're in Julian Assange's situation and they blackball you again because they don't even report it in the mainstream media. His story is nowhere. This vigil has to happen because, I spend hours every week just like printing out articles to study, and I go to all the mainstream stuff plus other things, and I don't see stories on Assange case.
That's literally why we pick this up and do it the way we do, as consistently as we do, because it's, for all of us, it's a huge sacrifice. Like we were talking before the vigil, I've been sitting in this chair at my desk at work since about 7:45 this morning, and I'm still going to be here probably until 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning. And Steve, same thing. And God bless Misty for the shit that she goes through to make this happen. But it's just something that has to happen, and that's something that I feel like other people that make videos and put out content don't really understand, is that once this is gone, their ability to make money from this is completely gone. They're not going to be independent media anymore because we've already lost the internet as we know it. It's just,
well, I think though, Andrew, it's possible though, how we were talking about how, the people at the New York Times and the people at MSNBC aren't scared. Some of the people on the left and independent media aren't that scared either, because they're hoping to get there before it goes bad. You know what I mean? And I mean, I don't know how many. I can't pretend to know like what somebody's intentions are, But it's just and some of it. I appreciate the hustle. Like I understand that, we do live in a society where you need to make money to survive, and if this is how you got to hustle, I get it. But we need more people out there, just talking about the shit that matters, no matter how many clicks they're going to get for it, or if their subscribers stop donating as much or whatever. Like media needs like a complete overhaul. And independent media has, I've talked to Steve about this a few times. It's endlessly disappointing. They're not talking about issues that matter. They're not talking about the things that matter or the things that need to be done. They're still telling you to vote for Joe Biden and things will be fine. It's so ridiculous. This is like the independent left media, and they're telling people to vote for Joe Biden. It's so ridiculous.
To his credit, and for all the shit that he's taken for it, Jimmy is finally caught up to 2018. So I'm really hoping in the next 6 months we can get him to 2019 and then 2020 by the end of next year. So that way we can have a real conversation.
He's come a long way in a short distance. I don't know him. I've never spoken to him, but I think that when Tulsi endorsed Joe Biden, that snapped something for him. And it was like, he shut off like a rocket. And ever since then, he has really radicalized quite a bit.
And he's done a great job. I don't mean that as like a derogatory thing.
No,
but there was a whole group of people back in 2016 demanding what he was saying about Bernie and saying those same things that were getting slapped down by the people that Jimmy had built himself with.
Yeah.
And then it even goes to the anti-Ocasio left and all of those people that were like, all of this is bullshit and a charade, most likely laundering money. And that's what it turned into.
Well, look, if you looked at it critically, or you looked at it, I don't know, cynically, not that I'm encouraging that, because it's not that much fun. But if you looked at what the Justice Democrats were, or what AOC is, you could have spotted that a mile off. But the thing is, like, left media is successful. Even the people who are just, even the people who are like, oh, but you should vote for Joe Biden. It's successful because there was such a wide lane for people to deliver some sort of news from that perspective. And progressives, almost to a one, are gullible as fuck. Gullible, because they all watched what happened in 2016 and went, yeah, I could double down on that. I could go for that again. And maybe not, but Tulsi Gabbard, who is still running in that party, I could throw some time and money into that. And when you try and approach either the fan base or the content creators themselves about things like Julian Assange or about things like the national security state, a lot of them are like, motherfucker, I'm trying to make some money over here. Like, I can't talk about that. And the self-censorship that takes place is exactly why 5 different countries got to conspire to put Julian Assange away. It's because people were so focused on, here's a medium where I can get money out of people for telling them things they want to hear, that I don't know, man. Like I feel like the intent of the whole digital media space kind of got hucked out the window as soon as people realized they could monetize their thoughts.
And they'll demonetize it if your thoughts aren't, mainstream enough. I mean, my appearance on Memorial Day on Jimmy Dore was demonetized almost immediately. Now, if anybody saw that and thinks that it was an off the rails conversation, then that person's boundaries, right, of like what is free speech and what's off the rails is pretty darn narrow. I mean, just we didn't peddle in anything that anyone could say as conspiracy theories. We bashed Biden a little, but we bashed Trump more. I mean, it was pretty mainstream. Hey, endless war is bad. That's what we talked about. Mercenary military is bad, and they demonetized that. And I think that tells you a lot, because we didn't even really push the boundaries very far.
No, I watched that interview, and I thought I thought it was informative, and I thought that people who maybe weren't as familiar with you, Danny, were definitely got like a more complete picture of who you are and what your work is about. But no, it wasn't raw and brutal and rough and bloody or any of that shit, man. It wasn't. I can promise you that the episode that you did on my show on Slow News Day, demonetized, I'm amazed at this point when I actually get that little green, okay, you're just suitable for all ads. Like, I'm floored by that shit. Almost everything that I do is demonetized out the gate, and then I have to go back and appeal. And I've got it changed over a couple of times, but it's really like, I'm not, if I had to do this for the money, I would not be doing this. I wouldn't, like, flat the fuck out.
What I find amazing is that, they'll demonetize something, or they'll take somebody's video down or whatever for, being misleading, but MSNBC, have they ever been demonetized? Have they ever had a video taken down? Has CNN ever been demonetized? Because they're all full of shit, and it's all garbage, but and obviously we all know why that is, and it's not like it's a secret or that anybody's going to be shocked by that. But at what point do we stop taking this shit? I'm kind of tired of having these conversations. Like, at what point is it enough?
Well, you don't get demonetized for being misleading about, a war and invasion of a sovereign nation, right? There's no accountability for that, is there? Because all the major networks bought Iraq, didn't they? They bought OIF-1,
Oh, without a doubt. I'm actually going through and kind of looking through the last time I had a video that actually got full monetization, and it's hilarious because it's the one that we did with the vigil that we did with Mark Lubers and Sean O'Brien, and that they let that be fully monetized. And we had on a named member of Anonymous, and one of the guy who I don't know if you know Sean O'Brien or not, Danny. He's a wonderful guy that runs Privacy Safe and is a lecturer at Yale for cybersecurity. Just wonderful human being, and tremendous amount of knowledge up there. But like, I'm surprised that has monetization on it. I really am. Like, everything, all the Commander X stuff demonetized. Everything that I think even saying Whitney Webb's name in your live stream will get it demonetized. And we know, we know why. We know why. And if we had, Andrew made the point earlier that we basically already lost the internet. I don't know if I'll go that far yet, but holy fuck, are we close?
Yeah, we are definitely close. And that's why I keep telling people, if you have a webcam, or if you have an extra hour or whatever, be the media. Like, we really do need everybody to just do tell the stories. As I don't know, you guys know I'm like a big believer that narrative control is a huge part of the battle that we face. And the only way I can think to overwhelm it is to just get more people out there talking as much as possible. I don't know what else to do.
Well, it's all about using the audiences, or using the content creators that already have audiences that don't generally get exposed to truthful information. Well, not truthful information, I said that wrong, but to information which is counter at a large scale to the narrative that's going on right now. And I think one of the big reasons, and big, not reasons, but ways that you can see this, Shoe on Head. I don't know if everyone knows who that is. She's a content creator. She recently released a series called Hell World, and immediately demonetized, audio ripped from YouTube. And her audience had never been exposed to that level of censorship before, or that level of attack from a major media platform, where they can't even watch the video of the content creator that they've seen for, I don't know, 12 to 15 years. So it's having people that already have large platforms taking a courageous step to make a video that blows a hole in the narrative in a major way, but is willing to risk that platform because they know that they have the audience and the support and that they're ultimately doing the right thing.
Do you want to jump into the World Socialist website article about the 10th anniversary of the Iraq and Afghan war logs, Andre?
I would, because I really like that article.
Okay, you want to set it up?
Sure, absolutely. So about a week and a half ago, I believe we actually missed the Saturday that it was, July 31st. There was the 10-year anniversary of the Iraq war logs coming out. Was the week before July 31st, whatever that is. Math kind of escapes me right now.
That would be the 24th.
24th. But the World Socialist website, and I'll put the article in the chats for everybody, released a wonderful piece that breaks down essentially every element of the Afghan war logs. It goes through even the support that Julian had in those countries. So I think it's just really important to keep this at the top of everybody's minds, because this is essentially what we're fighting for, is accountability for these crimes, because there has been no justice done yet.
You know, the Iraq war logs is what brought Julian Assange into my life. I'm almost embarrassed to say. I mean, I was 24. Yeah, you know, I guess it was a little after, but I mean, I was just coming out of Iraq, and I had been in Baghdad at the height of the Civil War, and been watching, as I said earlier, and I wrote about it in my first book, been watching the lies. You know, when I would get back to the base and pull up the internet and see that the commanders 3, 4, 7 levels above me were saying, no, there's no civil war here, nothing to see here, you know, and then of course Rumsfeld saying, and all these guys, and I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that when like bodies get dropped by the dozen every day in soccer fields, with like heads cut off and power drills through their joints because they were tortured the night before for being the wrong type of, you know, Muslim. And of course, this was all generated largely by our destabilizing invasion. I was like, wait a second, that's an insult. Like, you're insulting me, which doesn't matter, but you're insulting these victims, and lying about it, and lying about what the consequences of a regime change war are. And that bothered me. And so then, you know, 7, 8 years after that, I'm trying to write a book about what happened to me in Iraq, and, you know, intellectual shift and all that. And I was able to use that data, right? I was able to use the stuff from the war logs in the book to cite my sources, to state, look, here's the evidence. Like, here's my memory, which I could be lying about, but here's the evidence. And the evidence is the military's own reports on the daily. And believe it or not, it got through the censors, right? The public affairs folks who had to read my book, I was teaching at West Point when it published, they were so busy and bad at their job that they were like, they just looked at it real quick, and they were like, and they didn't know who I was, and so they didn't know what I was about to do, because it was my first writing, and they let it through. And I'm like, if they would have went into the footnotes and seen that like WikiLeaks is cited numerous times, they would have had they would have lost their minds. And so, but it was just fascinating. Of course, that was the tip of the iceberg, but that's what kind of got me into it, on top of the crimes that were exposed and all of this. And I think it does prove that point, though, that the biggest crime of these logs, they'll say like, oh, all this stuff, all these cables and stuff, and, you know, and all the different releases, they got people killed, you know, without a shred of evidence, right? Without a shred of evidence. And you guys talk about this all the time, so I'm just covering old ground. But, you know, the real crime, what they're really upset about, is embarrassment. You embarrass the empire, and the empire is a snowflake. It is a facade, a very powerful facade that just rests on insecurity. And when you just shake it up a little bit, put some sandpaper to it, it overreacts.
Just a little bit, too. How many videos are there, like pre-COVID lockdown, of some like 106-pound woman saying something to Joe Biden where he just turns on her and just jabbing his finger right in her face, and the snarl comes on, and it's like, that was a benign question. You know, I'm asking you about something that you wrote and voted for, and that's somehow beyond the pale.
How dare you question him, peasant?
Right?
No, Joe Biden's a man of the people, right? He's Delaware Joe, he's Amtrak Joe.
I mean, his hands have certainly been on a lot of people.
Did you see the video? Did you see the video of one of my colleagues in About Face Veterans Against the War? Asked him very politely, very politely. He was like, very careful not to be combative because he knew there'd be overreaction, didn't want to look like he provoked it. And he asked about like the Iraq War, and he said, like, listen, you didn't just vote for it, you championed it, you cheerleaded it, and like my brothers and sisters died, and like I don't understand. And Biden got real frustrated, and his reflex, talk about this is gross to me. Biden says, and the video's all over, he says, well, I lost my son too. Yep. And the vet, like this colleague of mine was like, what? No, I know, I'm sorry about that, but like, I'm not sure it's related, and he didn't die in Iraq, and like, there's so many confusing things about you going to that. And then, he gets further and further angry, and it's like, don't vote for me or whatever. Like, but I just thought that was instructive, that he goes to his own like victim place, like, and it is horrible to lose your son, and no one was questioning that, but it's like unrelated to the question at hand, and the fact that he like throws it out there, especially because his son was like vaguely military, you know what I mean? But like he was in the military, but like it's not like he was out like just pounding the sand, or that he was killed in Iraq. That was the question at hand, and it tells you everything you know about Biden's character, which is really problematic. And by saying that, I'm not saying Trump has a wonderful character, but you know what? I'm done with those caveats because I'm sick of that baiting.
Right. I have to. I almost weekly. Whether I'm talking with friends or whether I'm acting, or if I'm having a conversation on Twitter or something, the qualifiers. I'm done with the fucking qualifiers.
It's so annoying.
All you have to do is get to know me for about 5 minutes, and you are going to understand completely that I am not a Donald Trump supporter, nor am I a Joe Biden supporter.
I can't tell you how frequently I will, comment on something on Twitter and somebody will say, okay, MAGA. And I'm like, it takes a 3-second look at my timeline to understand that that's not even almost the case. No, I don't support Biden. It literally takes 5 seconds to look at my timeline. It's not like I hide it. It's not like I'm secretive. It's just the black and white mindset where they can't even imagine this gray area where that all the politicians suck and we're all fucked. It's such a team mentality where they think they have to pick a side and rah-rah. And it's so stupid. No, they're all useless and none of them care about you. And it doesn't matter if it's Biden or Trump. They're all pieces of shit who are going to start more wars and steal your money and destroy your kids' future. Go team.
Hey, Steve, I'm going to have to, I'll footnote you, but I think you gave me an idea for a future article that you'll probably see. I'm going to call it Farewell to the Qualifiers, forever. And it's awesome. It's going to be a stream of consciences rant. So thanks for that. But
I enjoy those. I do. I'm a fan of your writing. I am. I enjoy it. We do have a question for you, Danny, in the chat from our buddy Drufus. He was curious as to how filtered your internet access was when you were enlisted, and the example he used was, could you look up WikiLeaks from a base laptop?
Yeah, that's an important question. I never tried, I'm sad to say, like from a base laptop, especially overseas. I will say this though, later when I started, later you couldn't get to it. Okay, so I'm speaking now at the end of my career, the last few years, like 2015 to like 18, when I'm like writing prolifically on active duty and getting in some trouble. Not only could you not get something like WikiLeaks, I'll give you another example of how crazy it gets. So there is like a firewall on all government computers. So I could look up the New York Times and print articles. That's okay. But it got more and more stringent, especially around the time, and this is also instructive, around the time Trump was elected. So this doesn't make Trump a hero of free speech, but it tells you something about mainstream media and their response. So around the time Trump is elected, left-wing sites that were even a little bit sort of alt-left started disappearing, started coming up on the firewall. It used to just be kiddie porn, but now it's Tom Dispatch. Okay, has anyone read Tom Dispatch? Tom Engelhardt is the kindest, sweetest man who wouldn't let you say anything too mean. Okay, I mean, you know, he's biting and his writing is amazing and he believes all the, like, wonderful things. But he's the toughest editor ever. It's not mainstream, but it's very not polite, but like it's quality work. He puts scholars up there, and suddenly you couldn't get to Tom Dispatch anymore. And when you would try to get to it, what would come up on the screen is it would say, there's always an explanation, like, you cannot get to this website, and then it gives a reason, and it's always like a jumbled like predicate. It's like not even a full sentence, and it said like hate speech and like extremist group content. And I mean, I took a screenshot of it or whatever, or took a picture of it and sent it to Tom because it was so funny. It was hysterical because, I mean, that's an extreme example, but so that shows you how wide it got and where we ended up. And I think it does tell us something that a lot of that started to happen after Trump. Not because I think Trump was the one pushing to like suppress all this left stuff, not that he's above it, but rather I think that the mainstream liberal media actually, or faux progressive media, started to clamp down on anything that was kind of alt media around that time. I don't know if there's a direct correlation, but I think that it's not a total coincidence.
That's noteworthy for sure. We got someone in the chat who wants to thank you for your appearance on Fault Lines, and he enjoyed that quite a bit. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Action for Assange is invited back to Fault Lines when we're there in September. They've had some staff changes, and there's some history there that I don't need to go into again. I don't. I'm sorry I called Kyle Kalinske Tom Hartman's Padawan, Jamaro.
No, you're not.
We should be on your show.
Stop that. Don't apologize for that shit.
They also like the RT stuff as well.
Okay. Getting back to this WSWS article though, we wandered away a little bit. I mean, it's been 10 years. It's been 10 years since the release of these documents. The amount and the kind of crimes that were exposed through the release of these in a world that wasn't a fucking cartoon would have ground our entire Middle East adventurism to an immediate halt. But and I remember at the time, like I remember, mainstream outlets reporting on this and people acting like it would, calling it, a bombshell and, just massive, framing it as like game-changing revelations. And what happened? We had a crackdown on whistleblowers. We had a crackdown on journalists. Government employees weren't allowed to go read WikiLeaks. It was blocked from U.S. government-owned computers, and they simultaneously pretended it never happened while ushering in some of the most over-the-top propaganda that I think any generation has been exposed to. I'm a pretty consistently have said that America is the most propagandized country on the planet, but that's not hyperbole, at least in my opinion. I don't know. Do you have?
And not a single criminal who was exposed in any of those documents saw the inside of a courtroom. The only person who has is the two people that exposed it, and that's the society that we live in. That's so depressing. That's the only thing that's come of it. Nothing else has changed. Just Julian and Chelsea have been you know, destroyed as human beings. It's ridiculous.
You said, Steve, that, is the United States the most propagandized country? It's an important question. I do think that what we do have interesting right now, especially in the age of Trump, is a hybrid. It's an Orwell-Huxley hybrid. And the lines aren't perfect, but if to some degree the worst aspects of Trumpism have an Orwellian flavor to them, the more direct censorship, then I would argue that the establishment, quote, liberal media does have a Huxley feel. Just be kind of fat and happy and convince yourself that you're a polite liberal because you read, the New York Review of Books, so you're better than everybody else, but you don't really want to push any further than that, and just like pay attention to your iPhone and your apps and everything's good. And I just feel like that hybrid is the ultimate, and that is unique. Whether it's the worst in history is questionable. We could debate that, but there's a good argument. I will say that hybrid is unique. Some of it's technological, but some of it is like a political system's evolution towards this monstrosity that we have today.
What role do you think, or how much of a role, I guess I should say, because we just had a hearing with a bunch of social media executives in DC. To what extent is that government, or to what extent is that big tech monopolies trying never to run afoul of government?
No, I think that's interesting. It's both. I think a lot of times you see self-censorship in anything involving journalism or the technology that helps, facilitate journalism. Chris Hedges talks about that a lot, about how what you actually see in a lot of his colleagues, for example, and other journalists talk about it too, is that their willingness to, no one has to tell them to censor what they write. No one has to tell them to sort of avoid a story that might be embarrassing or hold off on it a little bit too long. They do that by themselves. And it's a chicken egg scenario, certainly. But in a world where only the exposer sees a courtroom, then I think that a chilling effect sort of develops over the years, and really over decades, where it creates a scenario where these tech companies and these journalists themselves and these big papers and cable outlets, they start to self-censor. And so I think it's a little bit of both. And also what we don't talk about is that the money behind it, you guys talk about it all the time, but a lot of folks don't. The money behind all this is bigger than government. It's bigger than government. In a lot of ways, the government's there to give you the illusion, or the elected official give the illusion of choice, but, to channel George Carlin, but I think it's correct.
So the World Socialist website article actually pulls in that idea of the left-wing media really well. A little bit of the ways down, it says, the Afghan war logs particularly exposed the claim by innumerable liberal pundits that the occupation of the country was the good war, supposedly waged to defeat terrorism, extend democracy, and protect women's rights. This they contrasted with the failed operation in Iraq. This dovetailed with the agenda of the new U.S. administration. Obama's phony anti-war posturing during the 2008 election had been accompanied by plans for a massive surge in Afghanistan. The myth-making was facilitated by the suppression of any information about the real situation on the ground by the U.S., its allies, and the corporate media. WikiLeaks lifted the veil on these lies, revealed the neo-colonial occupation aimed at looting natural resources and securing the control of geostrategic critical Central Asian regions. Mass civilian killing, widespread popular opposition, and demoralization within the U.S. military ranks all came to the surface, more fully than they had in the 9 years since the U.S. invasion. The publication was based on 91,000 U.S. war logs covering a period of January 2004 till December 2009, provided to WikiLeaks by Chelsea Manning, who had access to the material as a military intelligence analyst. So we've kind of highlighted it a lot here, this idea of the myth breaking of the liberal media. But I think the fact that I hate to say it, but I don't think we really did break that myth. I don't think that the war logs were necessarily enough, because all it did was allow it to get pushed out of public view. And the only thing that people see about the military is the parades and the NFL shows and the commercials with the good soldiers and all the bullshit. Where the things that WikiLeaks exposed 10 years ago are still going on. We never left these nations. We're still occupying Iraq. Right now, we could have a release of information twice as big as the Iraq war log, simply because we've been there so much longer and done so much more at this point.
I think that's an important point you're mentioning. I think the one thing that goes on in liberal media is the myth of the anomaly. This idea that America is at root a force for good. And it's this if-only thinking. If only we could get rid of George W. Bush, then it'll be okay. You know, if we can get an Obama in, or even a Hillary would have done just fine in 08, then it'll be fine. But then what happens is suddenly, you know, Ellen and Michelle are good buddies with Bush, and now we change it to if only we could get rid of Trump. Problem with that kind of thinking is worse and worse folks, and the bar for the if only, the bar for the obscene goes higher and higher. When we do this, and instead of looking at what's really at root here, why is the U.S. the most militarist nation on the planet? Why was Martin Luther King right in 1967 and still right, you know, 53 years later, that his country, you know, America, the indispensable nation, the city on the hill, his country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. So long as we're unwilling to engage with that, we're going to keep raising the stakes on this if only thinking, and then we're going to get a Biden, or we're going to get an Obama, and Obama will probably have been better than Biden, maybe. But what was Obama's legacy?
Well, and those if only
the legacy was Libya and the Afghan surge.
Yeah, those if only people, it's not even just that they went from if only we could get rid of George W. Bush, things will be fine, to if only we could get rid of Trump, things will be fine. They've gone back to say if only George W. Bush was president. And it's this crazy, like Steve says, we live in a fucking cartoon. We have people who, you know, 10 years ago were calling Bush every name in the book and talking about how dangerous he was. And he's all of those things. Like he's, you know, but now all of a sudden Nancy Pelosi is talking about how she pines for the days of George W. Bush, and, you know, Ellen sits and eats a hot dog at a football game with him. And it's this crazy, I mean, they've now rehabilitated the likes of James Comey and Dick Cheney, and what the fuck is going on? It's a circus. It's insane what's going on. We're the absolute most sociopathic scumbags on earth.
Danny makes such a good point, because it's what comes after. What comes after Trump? Because none of this is being addressed. What comes after Biden? And in my opinion, if we have elections in 4 to 8 years, the only possible people that can run are more extreme but more subtle versions of Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump isn't an aberration in that he's governed as a Republican president and passed a very boilerplate Republican agenda, and there's been nothing unique in terms of, you know, legislation, policy, you know, foreign policy, national security, the surveillance state. All of that has been entirely ordinary. And just a natural progression of where we were from the start of the Reagan era. But
it's propaganda wars for what billionaire faction or billionaire cabal gets to take control of the space weapons next. Like that's literally what it comes down to, is these people are just after grabbing as much power and scooping as much up as they can for the 4 years that they're in office.
I keep telling you, Andrew, the only reason we have a space force is so we can build the space wall to stop the space Mexicans. That's the only reason. Otherwise it's a peacekeeping mission. We're
gonna take democracy to Mars.
Yeah, with the help of Elon Musk. Yeah. I
But
just saw where
it's-
Richard Branson is going back up in space, or going up in space, or something like that. And I hope he stays there. I hope he finds it lovely and just decides that that's
They could
it for
take
me.
Elon Musk with them too. That'd be cool. But Steve, I think kind of what you were saying was more of like Trump is not, he's not anything special or out of the ordinary. The only reason they don't like him is because he has no talent for subtlety. He says the quiet part loud too often and they don't like it, and he's a little unpredictable. And that's the only reason they don't like him. It has nothing to do with anything else. And Biden will do the exact same things that Trump's doing now. He'll just be quieter because they're going to keep him in the basement. I mean, they're not letting him talk. That's going to continue. They'll wheel him out for some photo ops occasionally where he'll like smile and wave. But if he becomes president, we will never see him. There will not be speeches. There will not be, presidential addresses from the garden or whatever. So yeah, he'll be less. I mean, he tweeted out the other day something about, when I'm elected, you won't have to worry about my tweets. And that's because some unpaid intern writes your tweets, dude. You can't even form a coherent sentence. And
They put it on a shirt.
They
yes,
did.
they sure did.
They put it on a T-shirt.
They really did that. Yeah.
And I'm glad they did, because it highlighted the only real fundamental difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Mean tweets. That's like it. That's fucking.
Call me crazy, but I actually prefer my monsters to be like in the open rather than under the bed.
Yep. Same thing.
I like when Trump says what's on his mind. Not because I like what he's saying, but I'm like, oh, you're going to retweet, quotes from a segregationist, mayor.
I love it when he was like, yeah, we're just going to take their oil. Okay. Thank you. I mean, thank you for that. I appreciate your honesty. I'm one of those people too. I wish that his supporters would stop pretending like he actually does the things he says he's going to, because that's pretty frustrating. But yeah, he just straight up, and that really is the only reason they don't like him. If he could keep his mouth shut, I think that they would be fine with Trump. I think that they're fine with Trump anyway. Clearly, if they weren't fine with Trump, they wouldn't have run Joe Biden, because Joe Biden very well could lose. There are a lot of people in lefty independent media who think that Joe Biden has this on lock. There's no way Joe Biden is going to lose to Donald Trump. And I don't think it's anywhere near that close. I think that it's very foolish to think that, first of all, Joe Biden doesn't excite anybody. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Do you really think people are going to come out and vote for Joe Biden in the middle of a pandemic? Even if they mail in their votes and stuff, I don't know that he can overcome the passion that Trump's base brings, because it's kind of incredible how they stick by him despite the fact that he screws them over all the time.
I mean, the guy is running on a platform that's like, elect me and nothing will change. I mean, he said that out loud, yeah. He's like, nothing will happen to your checkbook, everybody, and just elect me, and that's it, like that. But he thinks that's going to work, and maybe it will. But if anyone could lose to Trump, it's Hillary, or the male version of Hillary, Joe Biden.
Well, and Joe Biden even told people to vote for Trump, or go vote for the other guy. I mean, he would get into fights with people at his rallies. Regular people wanting to ask him questions, he would like get in fights with it. Yeah, look here, fat. Like this is the okay. I'm about to rant for a second, but we have how many people in this country? What, 350 million? And it came down to Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and we're okay with that system? Like,
I should let you know how illegitimate it is.
What the fuck, dude? That's the best we could come up with in this country, dude. I could be president better than either of those two fuckwads. I mean, there are plenty of people in this country who would make a better president than either one of them, and that's our system. That's what either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, or Joe Biden or Donald Trump. I think it's time to ditch the system. I think moving on. It's not working out.
I was just saying to a very intelligent, very attractive friend of mine earlier today that if you want to know about American democracy, the first thing to know is that there is no such thing. And you just proved it for us, really, by saying that in 350 million people, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, that's who we have. We're supposed to believe this is a democracy? That those were the people chosen for us, and that's the key word, for us?
Well, and look, I've made this analogy before. I do think it's worth repeating. If you've got a machine and that machine has a design flaw in it, and that design flaw makes the machine kill you, your solution to this machine shouldn't be every 2 to 4 years, I'm going to slap a couple of shiny new parts on it and call it good. You know, it should be, we need a fundamental redesign of the machine. And yet it's so mind-numbingly difficult to get people, even people who are like not necessarily rah about the Republicans or the Democrats, but my libertarian friends, my friends that are Greens, my friends that are supporting a few other third-party candidates, like they still think that the answer lies within just getting the right person inside of a system that is broken by design, ran by sociopaths and pedophiles, and they're expecting a different result.
Insanity, defined.
So to kind of pull it back to the World Socialist website article here real quick, I want to read a couple more lines. Citing some of the previously unknown events contained in the records, a British paper wrote, "Bloody errors at civilian expense, as recorded in the logs, include a day French troops strafed a bus full of children in 2008, wounding 8, a U.S. patrol similarly machine-gunned a bus, wounding or killing 15 of its passengers. In 2007, Polish troops mortared a village, killing a wedding party, including a pregnant woman, in an apparent revenge attack. Attacks on civilians are frequently presented as targeted strikes on Taliban militants. To again cite The Guardian, the Harrier bombing is listed as killing 8 people. In another F-16 jet called in by the rifle squads, radioed afterwards that it could see bodies being picked up in the target area. 7 civilians were wounded and 1 killed in the attack. A further Apache helicopter strike outside of Kandahar was claimed to have killed 3 Taliban. It proved later to be 2 women and 2 children that had died. A Hellfire missile blast from an unmanned drone over Helmand was also claimed to have killed 6 Taliban. It later transpired that it had wounded 2 children. British troops at a checkpoint in Sangin killed 4 and wounded 3 civilians in July. In August, a 2-para squad rocketed what it thought were insurgents, killing 3 civilians and wounding 4. In September, an unmanned motorcyclist shot dead by a British patrol.
An unmanned motorcycle is shot dead?
Sorry, an unarmed motorcyclist was shot dead by a British patrol.
Okay, dude, I was like, wow, man, they're just fucking, that's somebody going on holiday right there.
And none of those situations or events are unique, and none of them stopped after 2010. They didn't roll back the rules to war, rewrite it, and then put it back out in the battlefield to be redeployed. It was a continuation of the same thing, just with heavier propaganda and attacking the persons that exposed them.
Danny, while we have you here, what the fuck happened in Lebanon today?
I would be remiss if I pretended to have followed the story well enough. But what we know is that, there's an explosion, thousands injured, I think is what I'm understanding. I have to follow this story because I've been writing about Lebanon for a long time and sort of how this system is imploding, and it's just this like tool of all these different powers. I really don't know what the official story is. I mean, there's like the warehouse and the port and all that, but I'll tell you, a lot of stuff's been exploding around the Middle East of late. I mean, in Iran, right? And that's pretty clear where that's coming from. But what we know for sure is that there's a lot of smoke surrounding Lebanon. It's been used and abused by all these different countries. It's become sort of a bellwether for the state of the Middle East, because the beautiful thing about Lebanon is it has every minority that's in the Middle East lives there, and it's like a tinderbox that's just kind of held together. And it's a perfect country. If you want to say Lebanon is bad, you point to Iran and say Hezbollah runs it. You know, if you want to say Syria is bad, you say, well, you know, Syria used to occupy it militarily and they killed, you know, Hariri and all that, the old prime minister. Of course, there's a flip side to that as well, because you had these Christian death squads that were fighting in the Civil War, and you have the Israeli influence. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on there. I mean, you know, there are like those districts in Missouri or in other parts of America who all the political sort of hounds follow. Like, as this district goes, America will go, you know, this spot outside of Detroit or whatever. In some ways, Lebanon has had that characteristic for the Middle East. It's often been kind of on the forefront of things. So I don't know. I don't want to jump in on details that I don't know, except to say that, you know, my understanding is that there was, you know, thousands of people injured, and there's a whole lot of
and this is the port of Beirut that got taken out. Like, that's how the lion's share of their supplies get in. There's not like it. I don't know. I've seen a few things. I can't confirm any of these, but the ammonium nitrate was mentioned, and that was what was blown up inside that warehouse, which points to fertilizer bomb, which points to attack. But I can't corroborate that yet, so you know, I'm not going to say with any certainty what happened. It happened just hours after Mike Pompeo, through the State Department, was releasing a number of statements warning about China's entry into Iran and how that will further destabilize the Middle East. And I wouldn't be surprised that if the same State Department that came up with, you know, Russia's paying bounties for U.S. soldiers came up with this is, you know, a Chinese and Iranian plot in order to further destabilize the Middle East, and now we've got to go do this.
Well, without saying, you know, because everything's forever on the internet, right? Without assigning any blame, without knowing all the details, I'll just say this. What do we know is going on in Lebanon right now? The UN High Commission report on responsibility for the assassination of, you know, Rafiq Hariri, which Syrian intelligence was likely behind. Okay, so if Syria would be upset about this, and now Syria is supposedly completely in bed with Iran, which is increasingly in bed with Iran, and I mean with Russia and China, you know, I don't want to put out any conspiracy theory just yet, but I will say that the timing is suspicious. Whatever happens in Syria, even if this was completely or in Lebanon, even if this is completely an accident, completely just a fiasco, I wouldn't be surprised if any sort of violence there, death there, accidents there are used by the Syria regime change crowd, by the anti-Iran war hawk crowd to say, look, here is Syria on behalf of Iran, on behalf of Russia and China, I don't know, on behalf of the Martians, is meddling in Lebanon again. And, you know, wouldn't you know, it comes right after you know, the Syrians look bad in a report. It's again, Lebanon's an important spot. We should really keep our eyes on. They used to call it the Paris of the Middle East, you know, Beirut. And it is a big port, and it is an interesting place because it is the kind of spot where some beaches have, you know, like burqas on them, and then others have bikinis. And it makes it a fascinating country, but it also makes it in some ways a bellwether for what's going on in the region.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Josh hates our dead air, but I'm trying to absorb all of that. I do kind of occasionally wander into conspiracy land, but with something like this, it seems to me, you know, that not having spent, you know, time in Lebanon, or not having spent any sort of significant time in the Middle East. I visited once when I was a kid, you know. What the U.S. State Department appears to want more than anything is another Cold War, and they want that to be as protracted as possible. And if a warehouse in Lebanon is the thing that gets them their Cold War, then absolutely 100% they will do that. It's almost like at this point, this fucking sham of a presidential election is more about what part of the world we're starting our Cold War in next. And Trump and Pompeo and the rest of those fucking demons seem to just have the biggest hard on in the world for China. And China's an emergent power, and China does threaten the US in terms of like global supremacy. So I see that. But for whatever reason, the Democrats have just fucking set up camp right there on the border of Russia, screaming and using the exact same phraseology that they were using 40 years ago to describe the Soviet Union. And I don't see the logic in it, but I'm not big on, forever wars. So maybe if I was, I would see the logic in it. I don't know. Can anybody fucking help me with this one? Why?
It's like how Ray McGovern says they do the same. The intelligence community does the same shit over and over again because it works.
Yeah, they found a formula that works and they stick to it. I mean, it really is the same thing over and over and over again. And I am just always curious, how many times does your government get to lie you into war before your sense of skepticism kicks in? Why are people still so willingly going along with shit like this? Like, because there's a significant amount of the population that will roll right along with Rachel Maddow telling them that we need, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's incredibly frustrating because how many times do they get to lie before people figure it out?
I mean, the more dangerous part is the larger portion of the population that doesn't even know that we went in and completely destroyed Libya. To me, that's even more dangerous than the neoliberals and the neoconservative portions of society that they've built through propaganda, because it's ultimately the people that know, that don't care, that are the actual wicked ones. Because the people that are doing the horrible things are doing it because the people that have the power to stop them won't.
I mean, we're getting, we're getting later in the night, but so I won't go on a huge digression. But I'm so glad you brought up Libya, because like only a sick country, right? Only a sick country and a sick media that will repeat its propaganda would do the following, and we do it repeatedly. Okay, so we break Libya, we destroy Libya under false pretenses and a whole bunch of lies. Libya then fractures into civil warring parties, two major ones. One of them being a former CIS warlord general. The Russians decide to have the temerity to back, right, in some way, that warlord, Khalifa Haftar. And then we scream to high heavens, how dare you back one of the sides in the civil war that we created? I mean, that's a bold move. You have to respect that game. You know what I mean? Like, it's incredible. But that's who we are now. And then we'll report it like Russia's getting aggressive in Libya. That was a headline. That was a recent headline in either the Times or the Post. And I'm thinking, like, is anyone going to mention that the French do too? And like we have NATO allies on opposite sides of the Libyan civil war. That's awkward, right? Like, Turkey is fighting against the Russian side, which also is getting support from the French, who lie about breaking the arms embargo. And then when they're caught, they're like, yeah, we kind of were. And like the whole thing is ridiculous. And then no one really ever writes. But to be fair, America did do this. Like we created it. And by the way, the warlord that you're backing, he kind of worked for the CIA for quite some time.
We had, there was a headline in about Syria where, CIA-backed rebels are engaged with Pentagon-backed rebels, and that was just a thing. Like, and people went, Sounds like they're busy. I wonder what's on TV, you know?
Well, that's the nature of neocolonialism. Colonialism is what it does is it takes that local population, and just like it does here in the US, it divides it. So that way the corporations and the shadow people can go in and take whatever natural resources they want. And that's why NATO is on both sides of the conflict, is because they just want conflict. They just want those people warring. It's the only industry that the losses are counted in blood. And it's also the only way to be able to fruitfully extract the wealth of a nation is by literally degrading it to the point that there's slavery, so no one has the ability to rise and challenge the power of the people exploiting them.
Well, and that's kind of like, did you guys see Chris Murphy's Twitter thread today about Venezuela? Anybody?
No, I had an early start day at work, and I got home and literally hopped in the shower and then sat down here for this. It's been my entire day.
Yeah. So Chris Murphy put out this Twitter thread today about Venezuela, and it is oozing with just imperial bullshit. But the thing is that they've now reached a point where they're like just saying it out loud. It's kind of crazy. I mean, he talks in this Twitter thread about how, you know, Juan Guaido is so charismatic and wanted to restore democracy to the nation. Fuck off, you douche canoe. Like it's amazing to me though that this shit, it really does show how effective the propaganda game is in this country, because this, like you guys said, we do the same thing every time and it's so effective, but it's kind of amazing that it's effective because it's so obvious, and yet here we are, you know.
It's interesting what he said though, because I'm looking at it now, and Chris Murphy just so disappointing, because he's been decent on Yemen, sort of, kind of, but like the charismatic opposition leader. Okay, that's, you know, what did George Carlin say? Like, look to the language, like tear apart the euphemism. Charismatic is an interesting phrase for a guy who's completely unpopular within Venezuela. Opposition leader is belied by the fact that he's not an opposition leader. He's recognized as the president in a political coup by most of the West, and then restore democracy to the nation. But it's interesting that the person restoring democracy and recognized as president is completely unelected in that role. So, I mean, that's a great sentence. I mean, you got to love it. We could spend 2 hours on it.
It also pissed me off, too, that I want to say it's down at the bottom towards the end of this thread, but he says something about the election not being valid, or like we all knew that it wasn't a real election, or some kind of, I don't even remember what, I'm trying to find it now, but
he says, then it got real embarrassing. In April 2019, we tried to organize a kind of coup, but it became a debacle. Everyone who told us they'd rally to Guaido got cold feet, and the plan failed publicly and spectacularly.
Yeah, the one I was talking about is the second thread, where he says, in early 2019, an opportunity presented itself. Maduro's re-election was a fraud, and the world knew it. No, dude. The charismatic opposition leader, Juan Guaido, stood ready to capitalize and restore democracy to the nation. Like, what kind of rewriting of history is that? Maduro's re-election was not a fraud. The world doesn't know it. It's been proven that's a load of horse shit. But he just, you know, puts it out there like it's fact. I bet he won't be taken down by Twitter, though, for lying about an election.
And I like what he says, you know, in April 2019, we tried to organize a kind of coup. That's right. Fine. But then it became a debacle. So the problem with the coup wasn't that America was organizing coups. The problem with the coup is that it was a debacle. Like, if it had gone well, then it would have been like a good coup. Everyone knows about the good coup.
This thread is basically him kind of making fun of Trump for not being able to pull off a successful coup. It's amazing. It's amazing. This guy is like considered to be somewhat progressive.
And he's laughing at Donnie Johns for improperly overthrowing a democratically elected leader of a Latin American country. Yeah.
He's like, hey, when my party does coups, when Saint JFK does coups, presidents and their brothers are executed in the streets. That's how we roll.
Right?
Okay, Donald, get your shit together.
Fuck, man.
Once again, the Democratic Party attacking Trump from the right.
We live in a fucking cartoon.
We do
It's
indeed.
true. And look, man, I've never met Juan Guaido. I've seen him speak. I've seen him interact with other people. The dude is about as charismatic as the bottom of an ashtray.
He's like the Howie Hawkins of charismatic, you know, like, there just isn't any. I don't mean to compare them politically, by the way, just the fact that they're not.
Because Juan Guaido may actually get to hold public office someday.
Does anyone remember back in Iowa a few months ago when the intelligence agencies literally stole the first primary of the season?
I recall that, yeah.
Does anyone else? And
I remember that. That was, yeah, good times, lots of fun.
just want to make sure that I'm not the only one that thought that happened.
No, I also remember nobody saying a damn thing about it, too. That was
Right.
cool. That was fun. Awesome.
Sometimes it's good to just check to make sure we're all living in the same.
Yay, democracy!
I mean, yeah, I think I'm dancing on his grave now, but I mean, Chris Murphy's third tweet's fun, you know. He says the winning play was right in front of us all along. Bring together all of Latin America behind a transition or new free elections. Okay, what happens if Latin America is against you and doesn't agree? Or take the time to work with or neutralize Maduro's patrons, Russia and China. That's interesting. So, like, Trump should have either worked with them, at which point he would have been a Putin and Xi Jinping pawn, or he should have neutralized them. Those seem like pretty opposing concepts.
They
Like,
do.
how do you do it? Like, either of those would have been fine, but Trump did what? Something in the middle? I don't understand what he's trying to say there.
He doesn't understand what he's trying to say either. That's the whole. That's
No,
all. He's just trying to
gave
make.
them some talking points, and he tried to fit them into a tweet. You know,
It's
that's
really
basically
hard to fit CIA talking points into 144 characters. Like it
Yeah.
has to be difficult.
And let's be real, it was probably an intern anyway.
10 parts, 10-part tweet. It's impressive.
Yeah. And
Don't-
it's
That's probably the
parts
whole
of
memo.
shit.
Like that whole thing probably came from some reel that he has, some source in the intelligence community that was like, "Hey, this is a great angle. Like, have you thought about running this about Venezuela?"
I for whatever reason, and again, like I've been busy as fuck this week. I don't, but Venezuela has been on my newsfeed pretty much nonstop over the last like 24 to 48 hours. And it makes me nervous because I'm afraid for the people that live in Venezuela who may be subject to a full-throated military action on behalf of the U.S. government.
Isn't our Navy positioned outside of there to fight cocaine? Didn't
Yes.
I remember that happening, that we sent a huge Navy fleet down there because we wanted to fight cocaine importation?
If the line cook at the biker bar where I had lunch today is any sort of barometer for that, the Navy's losing.
That's
I also heard that bounties are really bad, that you shouldn't put bounties on people's heads because if you do, then that's evil. But I feel like this guy Barr, the Sheriff Barr from the Western, that is America's foreign policy, may have put like a bounty on Maduro's head publicly and a bunch of other people. But again, I mean, I don't know. That seems extraneous. I'm not sure it's relevant.
Like
Wait a minute,
$15
are you
million
trying
or something like that.
Hypocrites?
There was a great comedy of errors that went down with that too, because there was an expat Venezuelan, former Venezuelan general who had gone over to Colombia and was like part of this one of the coup attempts. And the day that he botched the coup attempt, his name went up with a bounty on it for being a narco trafficker. Like 24 hours prior, he was our buddy.
Well, yeah, it's just because they did it wrong. They have to bring in some new.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, what we call you when you stop working with our CIA depends on like your religion and where you live. So like if you're like vaguely Latin American and we don't like you, then we're like, you're a narco trafficker, you know? But if you're like vaguely Muslim, Arab, Middle Eastern, it's like, aha, he's a terrorist now. You know, it's just like, it really depends where you live. Like the pejorative of choice is totally regionally and religiously dependent. You have to keep an eye on that. I think there's something there.
funny, man. I like it when you're on the show, Danny.
Me too.
I do. That humor is just gallows enough to make me chuckle, man. I'm gonna go try and scare away my hiccups. I will be right back.
I hate the hiccups. They're literally the worst. Oh,
He's going
there's
to find
either
the mirror.
there's
real
either the
quick.
super annoying hiccups or like the really painful hiccups.
I only get painful hiccups. It's bullshit.
Oh, that is shit.
But to fill a little bit of time here, because when Steve gets back, we'll probably start wrapping up. Let me see. We got a little more pieces of news to touch on. So Steve has the translation for this, but I'll kind of set it up here. There is a group in the UK or somewhere, I don't even know where, that recently gave Julian a Peace Prize. It is the Stuttgart Peace Prize. And this is something that we actually got off of the WikiLeaks Twitter feed. But just as a reminder to everyone, while Julian's in prison, he's still winning journalistic awards for the work that he's done. Most recently, the biggest thing that's come out from WikiLeaks is an attempt to stop a false flag attack before it happened. And just to kind of point out to everyone, this is the first time in probably 3 to 4 years that there wasn't some type of sarin gas attack or something like that happened in Syria that provoked a U.S. Attack back. And I think most of that is in part because WikiLeaks released to the world how these gas attacks were staged and were false flagged. So I just want to make sure that now that we are into August and false flag season in Syria has more or less come to an end at this point, that we can give a thank you to WikiLeaks for releasing that information and stopping another false flag attack before it happened.
Well, and if we're trying to waste some time too and talk about some things that WikiLeaks has managed to accomplish, I was thinking about this the other day about how, like right in the middle of, his being in the embassy and knowing that he was really, up against it and, starting his battle with the United States government, they still publish Vault 7. And that's kind of amazing if you think about it. Like the balls that takes to already be public enemy number one of the United States government and intelligence agencies. And then to release the largest CIA leak in history right in the middle of all that and still just do it because it's the right thing to do. That's pretty amazing. I was thinking about it the other day and I was just like kind of shook by how awe-inspiring that is a little.
Without the CIA having any knowledge that it took place too.
Yeah.
Because there was an article not too long ago that was quoting someone at CIA saying, if they hadn't have published, we wouldn't have known that they had this information. Like there was nothing set up in-house in the CIA to detect that this information had left. Like that's hubris to the point of being sloppy.
Yeah, Keystone Cops foreign policy.
Oh yeah. Did you want me to pull up the article about the Stuttgart Peace Prize?
Yes.
Jesus, man, that didn't work. I'm about to freak out on my hiccups. So, the Ansifter Stuttgart Peace Prize 2020 goes to Julian Assange, investigative journalist, programmer, and founder of the WikiLeaks disclosure platform. Julian Assange has been in the Belmarsh prison, high security prison in Southeast London for about a year. He faces expulsion to the United States and 175 years in prison. 26 proposals were submitted for this year's Peace Prize, one of which was withdrawn by the proposer in the second ballot. In the second ballot, Julian Assange received the most votes, followed by Reporters Without Borders, the Zigzag Sewing Studio in Burkina Faso, Jacqueline Flory, Dr. Wolfgang Stein, ends in an I, that's a Stein. researcher and activist, and Dr. Richard Arnold, mayor of Schwabisch Gmund. Almost 500 founders took part in each of the two ballots. Our thanks to go to the editorial group. Here, let's find out why. There we go. Annette Reinecke. I fucking murdered that, didn't I? The chair of the Anstifter in Stuttgart explains the choice of Assange. Freedom of information and the press is a right that was once fought against tyrants and despots. Since the first Declaration of Human Rights in 1789, it has been one of the inalienable foundations of a democratic society in Europe. The fierce repression against Julian Assange was also directed against the achievement of comprehensive political information for all people. With the awarding of the Peace Prize to Julian Paul Assange, the founders are sending out a signal not only to protect, but to enforce the right to unconditional freedom of information and the press. That's an excellent quote. Are we at a point where we can make the argument that the public has an inalienable right to know what governments do? Like, is that something that we can start, pushing other journalists, other content creators, other people who host shows to discuss with any sort of frequency?
I doubt it.
That was actually the very first note I took from the very first thing that Dan had talked about. And we had talked as a group about the idea of having nothing to hide, so why does it matter if people look? That should no longer be something that people say in relation to themselves. It should be something that people say in relation to how they view their interactions with their government, whether it's on a local level, a state level, or a federal level. And I think it should be, and not to make it humorous, but down to the point that the businesses and the people that support you should be logos and patches, like literally, if not just on the signage behind you, because in every other situation, all of your advertisers have to be known. You have to put, this includes a paid promotion by, and I feel like our politics shouldn't be that different. And when people see Raytheon and Boeing and UC Global and all of these banksters having their logos and faces behind the politicians, it'll make them change who they support.
Well, and just as far as like being able to know what your government is doing for you, I think it was Caitlin Johnstone who put out a tweet. Damn it, I mention her in almost every show I do, y'all. It's not intentional. And anyways, but she put out a tweet something about how like the more power that you have, it's like the inverse reaction of like how much privacy you should be entitled to. So if you're an elected official and you're, a senator or a congressperson, you don't really have any more right to privacy. You work for us now. And I don't understand why there would be people who would argue against our right to know what our government's doing in our name. I want to know. I think that anybody who trusts our government to just do the right thing is an idiot,
Someone needs to create a ledger. It'd be really difficult, but I think the evidence is out there. A ledger of American history, say since World War II, showing the risks and the costs of every time too much information was given out by the government, right? Too much information was exposed, and all the cost and risk and outcomes every time things were hidden, right? That every time the government, was doing these things in secret. And I would like to, I know for a fact that ledger is very skewed in the direction of transparency being better. You can say that, but, and I'm sure people have proven it, but the ledger is pretty ugly and it's pretty one-sided. And I just really believe that if we're going to have a reflex in one direction or another, if our instinct is going to be towards something, to the extent that we're going to be binary, I don't know. I'm gonna lean towards transparency based on everything I've experienced and studied, and I think that seems like a pretty rational view. Although that's just what a crazy person would say.
I mean, right there in like one of the first chapters of Cypherpunks, the concept of privacy for the weak and transparency for the powerful is discussed, and that doesn't mean that like you and I are weak. It just means that we don't have political agency. We're not an economic superpower. We're not making decisions, on the daily that affect millions and millions of people's lives, and that shouldn't be too hard of a sell. Like, it's not when you talk to people and you have this conversation separate from how they feel about Julian Assange or how they feel about politics. Like, just a broad conversation about this. 99% of the public is on the side of, yes, individuals need privacy and the powerful need transparency. It's when it comes to which powerful people, and the people who are of one political stripe or another will probably argue that their pet politicians or their favorite corporations deserve to do things in the dark and to not disclose anything from funny accounting to war crimes. And the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs showed us both funny accounting and war crimes. Danny, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Will you please let everyone know where they can find you and where they can find your work?
Absolutely. Glad to do it. And glad that we're doing the Fortress on a Hill coming up next week, you and I. So my website, skepticalvet.com, pretty much gathers everything together, and then do a weekly column at antiwar.com, as well as a whole bunch of other places extraneous. But and then my podcast is Fortress on a Hill, and we've had some great guests recently. So and Steve's about to be our latest coming up. So thanks a lot for having me and for just giving me the opportunity to pontificate, make dark jokes, and hopefully say something valuable somewhere in there.
Yeah, thanks for being here. You're always a great guest. I think the last time you were on, I was also on, so it's always fun to have you here. But I'm Misty. You can find me on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. I also have a new show with my friend Jesse. It's called Facts on the Ground. If you guys just search that on YouTube, you can find it that way. But yeah, don't forget to share the GoFundMe link for the trip to DC. And yeah, just thanks for having me on again, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for sticking with us and watching through. And I also want to thank everyone who has donated recently to the GoFundMe to make that possible, because it is huge to actually be able to get out there for 3 weeks and do this. We are working on developing to release the graphics. We have the event schedule laid out. So yeah, look forward to that to come. My name is Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. You can find us on Twitter at action_4 Assange. And you can find all of our calls to action, as well as updates on action4Assange.com. And this week, please don't forget, reach out to your city council people and ask them to make an emergency motion in support of Julian Assange, because there's probably only this one city council meeting left going into September. And that's, I don't know. Thanks, everybody.
My name's Steve Buchanan. I host a show called Slow News Day. If you're looking for it on YouTube, you type in Slow News Day Podcast into your search bar. I am on Rockfin and D Live. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this with us. We love you. I had a $5 super chat at one point. So thank you, Kate. And to my co-hosts, Andrew and Misty, thank you very much. Danny, you were fantastic. Please do this again. And I'm really looking forward to Tuesday. I will hopefully have cured my fucking hiccups by then. Yeah, thank you to Sleepy Josh on the 1s and 2s and Mean Panda for the graphics. And we will see you Saturday. Good luck to us all.